But I think also some people, what they do, especially the ones that become most intense, and they start using like the language of good and evil and that kind of stuff to talk about them and the other side, they almost make it their religion. It becomes everyone needs a source of meaning, a source of what am I here for, what am I here to fix the world. And when politics becomes the ultimate answer to that question, then it makes so much sense that it ends up becoming that, the stakes end up becoming so high, because this is my very existence. Yeah, and that's not to say that it shouldn't be an important part of one's existence, but I think far better to, instead of making politics your god, make God your god.
Hello, welcome back to JTV Podcast. I'm very excited today, Ollie, because today I want to ask you about a topic that I've wanted to sort of interrogate or quiz you about for quite a while. And it's quite topical at the moment because for our American listeners, Thanksgiving's coming up, and there are two things we never discuss at a Thanksgiving table. What are they?
Religion and politics.
Religion and politics. What do I want to talk about
theory.
Today?
Religion and politics.
Religion and politics. Now, full disclosure before we go in, I myself am not the most politically involved person. Never studied it in school, never got that involved. I couldn't tell you who's the Prime Minister of most countries or what's really going on in Parliament, but I could smile and nod to make enough conversation. However, you, my friend, are quite the opposite.
What are you talking about?
You're a very passionate political heavyweight, in my view. He's got a very humble, smart...
So it's all relative. Compared to most people involved in politics, But
you're far more passionate.
I'm a weasel.
You're far, far more passionate than I am. And that's what I want to get into today. I want to understand a bit more about how we can view the political world and political discourse and being involved in world politics and minor and more, local politics. And I don't want to go into shul politics, God forbid.
That's the best one of them all.
But I want to look at all of them through a Jewish approach and to find out how relevant they are in the eyes of Judaism, how important you think they are or not important, and just get going in that. So, I might just begin asking you a very open-ended question, which is, where do you see the role of politics? You can define that as you like in Judaism, but you can also define as you like.
Oof. God, I'm going to get in trouble with this answer. You can't not. Somehow, something that one of us is going to say in this interview is going to get us in trouble if it gets picked up. So, let's just hope it doesn't get picked up. All right, so, the role of politics in Judaism. I actually did a video on JTV about maybe 8 months ago called "Is Judaism Left-Wing or Right-Wing?" And it was based on a talk that I heard given by Rabbi Zobin, where he explained that at the beginning of the Torah, we see two human civilizations contrasted with one another. We start off with the pre-flood civilization, which is anarchy, basically. Complete law of the jungle, everyone each to their own, no real rules governing society. And he sort of called it like a free market libertarianism gone haywire. And then that's immediately contrasted after the flood, because clearly the Torah is saying this was problematic, with a highly centralized, uniform society, which was can you guess?
The post-flood Babylonians.
The Tower of Babel.
Sorry,
Tower of Babel, exactly. Where they were all of humanity were forced, really, to work together to build this society symbolized and epitomized by this big tower going towards heaven. In fact, the Midrash tells us that bricks were not expendable, but humans were. And it sort of has these underlying connotations and resonances with, the communist projects of the 20th century, where it was all about the goal of, ultimate communism, and where just the same way human beings were tragically very expendable. And again, God doesn't like it, and he scatters all the people, and he creates difference and diversity within the populations. On the one hand, you have an extreme individualist and then extreme collectivist, and it doesn't seem like either seem to work. And it's amazing, by the way, if you just look a little bit beneath the surface, you see these really represent the battles of our day, albeit in more moderate forms today, most of the time. These are the battles that we have between individualism and collectivism. But so what is the Torah's answer? So immediately after the Tower of Babel, we zoom into one man, Abraham, who does want to create, does have a political vision, which is a moral world, a world that recognises godliness for society. But the Torah is preoccupied with just this one man and this story of one man and woman, Abraham and Sarah, and then their children building a family, and then the generations after that, and the tensions that arise, and the individual problems and challenges and jealousies, and financial issues and marriage issues and fertility issues, and it's all very personalized. And eventually we come to form the Jewish people, the nation, in the next book of the Torah, and their job is to try and set an example and create a one sort of micro society which is there to set an example and influence the world sort of at a more a smaller level than some big grand global political scheme or vision. And it's almost as if the Torah is telling us that actually the way it's almost like it's not overly concerned with what specific kind of political system you have. And we can certainly get into different political policies, and I think you can find both more liberal and more conservative elements to Jewish law. I don't think it's that clear-cut, and we can definitely talk about particular issues, whether they're economic or social, political, but it's almost as if the Torah is telling us that it's more concerned with how people operate on an individual level than big, grand political schemes and political policies. That's the most important way in which the Torah believes we're going to change the world. And it's interesting, you look at some of these politicians throughout history who had great, grand political schemes that were to save the world and look after the poorest and weakest, most vulnerable. And when you saw their personal lives, it was not particularly impressive. In fact, even Lenin, for example, was known to be a particularly odious person, in his personal life. And so the Torah seems far more occupied. It's not that it's not a political document, but it's far more occupied with the way we interact on an individual level with each other, rather than what the government does. It does have some policies for government, but it's relatively unconcerned with that. And I think for anyone, and we do see this, and I've seen plenty of examples of this, where people say they project their political ideology onto their religion. In this case, Judaism. They say it's. I mean, I once was in a talk in my shul where someone was. They brought in to give the talk. He was a sort of pluralistic Jewish educator, and it was just before an election, I think in 2017, and he said, he was talking about the fact that the Torah every 7 years has this idea of making everyone's need to leave the land fallow, and the poor can come and collect from it, and then also spoke about the Jubilee year, how land gets redistributed, land ownership. And he said he was trying to argue that Judaism was basically a socialist document because of that. And I certainly wants to provide. It's true there are some redistributive elements to it. There's also some very strongly free market elements to it. I mean, it's just not so straightforward. And for anyone to try and monopolize Judaism under one political ideology, as he did, and he actually said, so if you can't, he said, if you can't vote Labour, therefore, this general election, but at least don't vote Conservative. And he was saying this with his Judaism hat on. I thought it was really inappropriate. I think it'd be inappropriate for someone to say you should vote, to say as a spiritual leader, you must vote for any party. And people try to do that. And the point is, I just don't think it's appropriate to be doing that. And one of the chief reasons being that, Judaism is actually much more focused on individual morality than big political systems.
Very nice. It reminds me of an idea that, Maimonides writes about free will, that every single individual has free will, has a level of bechira, free choice in their lives, except for political leaders. That the role of political leaders and how they govern their countries is purely in the hands of Hashem.
Yes.
It's not seen as individuals.
Yes. This is one of the reasons I decided not to enter politics. I thought, well, God really runs that part of the world.
It's talking about how, like, Pharaoh, especially after, I think it's the third plague, it's always that God hardens Pharaoh's heart. Pharaoh hasn't got a choice anymore about letting the Jews go. It's purely God's plan.
Although some people say that was actually to give him a choice, because had his heart not been hardened, he would be so overwhelmed by the plague that there would be no choice to make.
But that argument isn't necessary if you're going to explain why he needs to be punished, if it was purely God's choice. But the idea being is that major political things, and that an individual is not meant to have that much power, that much control over the world. That's not what the individual's there for. Therefore, that power doesn't really go to them. It's purely in the eyes of God. But given what you said, then would you say there's any purpose or goal, and you touched on just about yourself, about a Jew being involved in, that country's politics or government or fighting for it?
No, I'm certainly not saying people shouldn't be involved in politics. In many ways, I think we have to do a hishtadlut. I mean, I think, we've got the upcoming holidays of Hanukkah and Purim coming up. They're intensely political holidays. Esther was an AIPAC lobbyist. Was she not? She had to go in there on behalf of the Jewish people and try to lobby the king. And we do believe in having to do hishtadlut. We have to put in our effort. We have to do all the things necessary, of course. And also, I think there's nothing. It's not unreasonable for people of Jewish conviction to be involved in general politics of the country they're in. I just think all I'm saying is the danger is when you have people who are wearing their Jewish religious spiritual hat and saying that their entire political ideology is in the name of Judaism. I'm cautious, very cautious about that. And certainly, if your main career title is one of being a rabbi or a spiritual leader, and then to be, to try and project an entire political ideology onto that, and to be involved in politics, there's nothing wrong with being involved in politics, but to claim that your entire political party that you may work with or associated with, they represent the essence of everything that your spiritual values dictate. I'm very cautious of that, because I just don't think it's that straightforward. So no, I'm not against being involved in politics. I'm also been involved in politics, but I'm just saying about just being careful sometimes to make distinctions.
Okay. Would you say maybe your caution is because you're sort of skeptical of the authenticity and the motivation behind that? Someone views their religious identity purely through their political actions. For them, their Judaism is expressed through their political involvement or...
Yeah, I mean, it happens. And actually what ends up happening is that Judaism becomes no different to the political ideology they subscribe to, and then they might as well just dump the Judaism bit. As I say, so much of Judaism is about one's personal relationship with God, with other human beings, with internal growth. There's some aspects of Jewish law which talk about, mass economic and political policy, but the vast majority is not associated with that. So I just think I don't think it's wrong to say that the reason I'm involved in politics is because of a broad value like the importance of helping the world or standing up for my people or whatever it is. But you sometimes find people even they literally can hijack mitzvot or festivals and make it entirely about a contemporary political issue, when it's just not appropriate.
Yeah, you ever watch, but every Hanukkah this happens, that in this country, in England at least, the political leaders always get out and put out a Hanukkah video where they try and project their current ideology or manifesto into the story of Hanukkah. And
their ideology and manifesto always is the perfect embodiment of from darkness to light.
It's always that as well. And you watch and go, this actually has nothing to do with Hanukkah.
Yeah. But look, it's nice that they do it. I mean, I certainly think when I see these political leaders, whether in America or the UK, sending these messages to Jewish people, I mean, think about that happening 100, 200, 300 years ago. It is a great thing to see that they feel compelled to do that.
It's always very reassuring, and
Yeah.
it's quite sweet to see a Hanukkah outside Downing Street, or that there's a White House Hanukkah party going on. Even though, they do feel very sort of cliche when they put out and very sort of scripted. The fact that, because we're talking right now, should a Jew get involved in politics? And we're not even appreciating how privileged we are that is a question. That Jews can have a place, and not just, we have to hide alongside our people in politics, but there's a Jewish voice in politics.
Yeah.
They'll look out for Jewish issues, and that the government ought to be, experienced and qualified to speak about issues that affect Jews. I remember at the start of all these COVID regulations in this country, I found out they put out a whole document on the government website about Simchat Torah, and could you carry the Sefer Torah or not? Should you put a bag over it? How should you sanitize between it? And I liked how, on the government website, we had sort of bizarre halachot laws around lifting a Sefer Torah in a sanitized way.
Yeah.
I thought that was quite sweet, almost funny, but it's quite sweet in a way that we were that comfortable. So we're very, very privileged in it. And we are talking in a very contemporary sense, in a Western sense, not probably a step removed from the political nature in Israel, for example, where the religion and politics are far more hand in hand. We are in a sort of, not a religious or post-religious state, but the government seems to run outside of that.
Yeah. But I think what we will certainly see happening a lot in America is, as I said, that person that came into synagogue, saying Judaism it's a socialist document. Like, really, does it want the government to own the means of all production? Really? Like, do they want to have very high tax rates throughout but equally, you have people that say it's Judaism and contemporary conservatism are one and the same. That's also not strictly true at all. You look at, for example, you can have a lot of conservatives that are very strong on, prison and tough on law and order. I think Judaism probably sees prison as quite a cruel and unusual form of punishment.
It's not really a concept punishment we have. It's the rabbis create, I think, a sort of cherem type thing, a exclusion type thing. There are cases in the Gemara where they basically will put someone in a room where they can't get out of and just leave them because they knew the person was guilty, but they couldn't exactly prove it. But prison's not really a thing we have. We have fines, we have more brutal punishments, but
or whipping,
really
and then but the idea of forcing someone to be in solitary confinement for 30 years is an extremely harsh sentence. But also, whereas, for example, they would say much better to give them a horrible whipping for, but then I also see the concern. I see the concerns on either side. I'm just saying it's not clear cut. Another example would be abortion. It's the issue of abortion. It's not as straightforward in the Judaism does not fit in the American pro-life camp. It also doesn't necessarily fit in the pro-choice camp, but it's more nuanced than that. So again, I just think that you just have to be careful to make Judaism very policy prescriptive, or do specific policies, support specific policies in the name of Judaism, when some of the time it's just it's too tenuous a link that you're creating.
Also, you're probably just devaluing Judaism by restricting it to these sort of political natures. It seems that basically that religion makes sense should transcend these political sort of terms and world. It should go above that. And also, as we understand Judaism and religion, that it should impact every decision in one's life. And that's regardless if you're for whichever wing you're in, whatever policy you're taking by, there's a Jewish way to act within that. Any system. A lot of things I think about is, maybe the reason why I'm more put off by politics is not the nature of what's really going on, the actual importance of making laws and keeping the country going, protecting the economy and jobs and things like that. But the political discourse that I've experienced, the way it's spoken about, and people argue on different sides of the political spectrum, there's no part of that is attractive to me. It's incredibly off-putting. And I wanted to hear sort of your take on this, because I know you're far more vocal and you're more politically, you have far greater conversations with people in the political world. And what's your take on how the discourse is made?
So I think it's really very bad, especially in America, really bad, on both sides of the political spectrum, I mean, like, terrible. I think it's probably a fair bit better in this country. Still not fantastic, but one of the reasons I've become a little bit... In many ways, I have a deep love for America because of, the society that it's created. I think it's been a remarkable force for good, even though it certainly has its fair share of sins, as does any country. But today, we see that there is this, each side of the people on the left and on the right, they've dug their heels in so much to such an extent. And I think it's certainly been provoked by social media. It's been provoked by just politicians as well on both sides, that are decided that both sides decide they want to play dirty, because their justification for it is, look, we're in war now. This is civil war.
Also, they'll say it works.
They might say it works. I think also the Americans, I think the American psyche is or persona is more kind of brash and just say what's on someone's mind without any sense for diplomacy. And I think civil discourse is being eroded, and you have now, there's almost like, and one of the reasons I decided not to be a political activist in terms of being a public spokesperson, let's say, and really going down that route in my life, there's a variety of reasons, one of which you mentioned earlier, but another reason is because, especially in America, but even in the UK too, to some extent, politics has become so polarized that if you declare yourself to be part of a political wing or political party, the other side of that debate, or people have such strong passions or feelings, they can't see you beyond that definition. And you're so much defined by that you become so divisive and polarized. And I think that's scary, and that's if people can't have healthy political discourse where, I happen to like football, you happen to like this, I happen to be a bit more to the left, you have to be a bit more to the right. It's good to have vigorous debate, but where it becomes nasty, where it affects my social life. So we saw it happen with the Remain and Leave campaign as well, in the UK, the Brexit debate. Where it starts to affect people's ability to interact with certain other people, that's a sign of an unhealthy political discourse, where people are no longer seen as legitimate for having certain views. And sometimes, by the way, it can be really hard or even potentially appropriate. So, for example, I really struggled with people that wanted to vote Labour for Jeremy Corbyn in 2019, but not because of him being, left-wing on economic policy or even on political, but because of his anti-Semitic past. But then again, I would never, quote-unquote, cancel anyone. I'd have a conversation with anyone. I would be civil and polite to them. I think that's what's being lost now. Therefore,
the art of having a conversation with somebody you don't necessarily agree with. Yeah,
and respect for one another, and also being able to see someone beyond just their political opinion, and recognise that in the vast majority of cases, people have these opinions because they want to make the world better and they have good intentions. Some people just see the other side as evil, and I decided, for me, I certainly have always been thinking about how can I try and make a positive impact in the world, and that's certainly why I considered politics for a while. But I decided that this political issues, which are very depersonalized, they're about big political projects. I'm much more interested in interpersonal morality as a way of fixing the world, and I think Torah is too. But this whole issue of people being labelled and unable to be seen beyond their political views was one of the big reasons for which I thought, I don't see it. This is not the hill I want to die on. It's not worth being so intensely involved in politics when you just end up becoming so divisive, and that's really sad. That's a sign of a much more polarised and divided society. But there we go.
Is there a remedy to that? Because I'm thinking sort of, especially one of the points you made there, the Talmud makes a distinction between two different kinds of machlokes arguments. There's one that is l'shem shemayim, for the sake of heaven, and one that is made for people who argue not for the sake of heaven. What's for the sake of heaven? The good example is two guys learning a bit of Torah together, and their ultimate goal is to find the emet, the truth. What is the Torah trying to say? What's the lesson they can learn here? So one guy will argue his point, what he believes it to be, and he'll bring his sources, and his friend will bring the other sources, and he'll argue this, that, and the other. But it all works, it's all healthy, and they'll be yelling at one another and really, really aggressive because they're so passionate about finding the truth. They want to understand this Torah teaching. And they'll enter as friends, and they'll depart as friends, because even though they will argue on every single line of the points they were making, they share the common goal of to find what the Torah is, what the Jewish law is in that scenario. An argument that is made not for the sake of heaven, and the story of Korach in the Torah is a very good example of this, it's about ego. It's about, I want to win over you. That I want to use the points that just to break down your argument. I will catch you out. If you make a slip up, I will hone in on that point and I will argue and I will fight. If you say one controversial thing 2 years ago, I will put it on all the papers and I will over-promote that and I will try and break you down. My goal is more to beat you, the opponent, but myself above more than the overall goal. Politics is in essence, and the reason we appoint politicians, I understand it, is because the country is quite big. And we haven't got time, we've got to do our own job, we haven't got time to deal with the issues. We appoint somebody on our behalf who's meant to fight on our behalf for the best for the country and for the people, more than just ourselves. And when we lose sight of that, when we get very polarised and we're debating more about, can I stop your bill getting passed? And can I make sure that there are more of my colours team in Parliament than there are yours? And we're thinking more about that and more about how I can defeat my enemy and how we can get more hits and more votes and more young people out and more campaigners and more traction. And that's your motivation. That's the only motivation. And you lose sight of the genuine fight, which is just trying to make the world a better place. Yeah, then you'll lose it. And then it makes sense almost, and it's sad that bipartisanship or political alliances go away, and to the fact, and we're at a point when occasionally they do happen, you do see sort of people on different parts of the divide coming together on different issues, how they will lose supporters on their own side as they are traitorous and they are betraying the values because they are having the decency to have a conversation, to listen to the other person's point of view. Also, more than that, it's an intellectual point of view, an academic point of view. The way you learn something is you learn and develop any idea is you have to have it challenged. Like the mashal, or the example I was thinking about, is the way you build a safe, like a safe to protect something, is that you will build a strong metal box, and then you'll whack it and set fire to it, and you'll try and blow it up and freeze it and do whatever you can, try and break in. And if you break the safe, then you work on that issue and you fix that issue, then you try again. And the way you build the most safe is by spending all your time trying to destroy it until the point you can't destroy it anymore. At that point, it's completely 100%, it works, it does the job, your argument is bulletproof.
We'll have a few dents, but yeah.
Fine, but then you built it up and you have more confidence in that argument because it's been challenged.
Yeah.
And when it happens in an environment, then a base medrash, a house of learning, can be a great example of this, because if everyone's pursuing it for the right reasons, then you'll all leave wiser and stronger. Yeah. The issue is if we get stuck in echo chambers, if we get stuck in just sort of sticking to our own crowd that promote our own views and will push down and berate the other side, not only are we not getting anywhere, not only is it civil discourse going away, but surely it devalues and weakens your own arguments because they've never been tested. Absolutely,
and that's the way Parliament in the UK was designed. If you look at the way the actual House of Commons is set up, it's meant to have the government on one side, and then facing the other side is Her Majesty's loyal opposition. Meaning we are both sides are loyal to Her Majesty's government, Her Majesty's country, society. We're both loyal to making the best possible society. We're just debating over, this is for the sake of heaven or for the sake of the country. That's how it's meant to be. And that's how politics can be at its best. And I think your argument of your point about argument for the sake of heaven, that's exactly the point here. What's happened is we've stopped arguing over the opinion and we've made it about the person, or rather we've been unable to separate the two, to realise that we're both trying to make society the best it can be. And I think often we see people, when politics gets bad and gets ugly, is when people start saying you are evil, or your policy is evil rather than your opinion or policy is wrong. You know, when you start calling the person scum, you know, that is when it gets dangerous, because we need to separate the opinion and the person. You asked what the remedy to all this is. I think a lot of people, the reason why tensions are so high, especially in America, I think, look, on the one hand, it's because people really care about their society and their future, and they love their country. But I think also some people, what they do, especially the ones that become most intense, and they start using like language of good and evil and that kind of stuff to talk about them and the other side, they almost make it their religion. It becomes everyone needs a source of meaning, a source of what am I here for, what am I here to fix the world. And when politics becomes the ultimate answer to that question, then it makes so much sense that it ends up becoming that, you know, the stakes end up becoming so high, because this is my very existence here. And that's not to say that it shouldn't be an important part of one's existence, but I think far better to, instead of making politics your god, make God your god. And if we can all be one nation under that same God, that means it's much easier to speak from a common lens, a common language. We're all, created in God's image, children of God, and that's the most important thing. That's the most important thing. Then, right, how do we try and make society better? Okay, and then I think God and religion, certainly Judaism, recognizes that politics is only one, political policies from government are only one part of the equation of making society better and what we're here for. And Judaism really empowers individuals in saying, you think that it's only the prime minister that can have all the power. Actually, you're wrong. Just you said the prime minister's heart is in the hands of God, and the place in which we are most empowered is in the grassroots. Is in the way that, and my meaning, why I'm here, is actually can be answered by looking around in my immediate vicinity. Who needs me? How can I make a difference in the immediate world around me, in my family, friends, and community? So I think that's got to be a big part of the remedy. We actually need to tone down the stakes almost, and give people, and I think that will give people fuller lives.
Well, tell me if you think this links into. I had this theory recently, or one of the reasons why people in the political world find it almost so easy to lose sight of the greater goal and get to pettier levels is because a politician in Parliament is a few steps removed from actually how their policies affect the man on the ground. If you and I are planning an event together or something together, and we have to organise it together, there are very few barriers between our planning and the actual event itself. And so therefore, even if we disagree on something, we can find it quite easy to go like, well, we've got to get the event working, and we're less likely to get too aggressive about it because it's very easy. It's very attainable to us that it's all part of the same process. If you're so many levels up the ladder that you're creating a policy that will put some money into one thing that will eventually affect this person, that affect that person, and then years later, someone down in this part of the country will benefit a bit more from your policy. You feel so far removed from that, it's very easy to lose sight of that, and far easier to get into the more petty, I've got to beat my political rival. So maybe I'm just trying to excuse or justify a little bit of how, and I think that applies more than just politics and just all things, how we can detach ourselves from a reality and therefore find it easier to do things that we probably wouldn't ideally do. However, if we were to again go down to the more micro level, the more interpersonal level, and assess every situation in that point of view, it'll be far easier to see the greater good.
Yeah.
Which is basically trying to take teachings of Torah and a Jewish viewpoint and trying to read that into and apply that into a political mindset and see if that would be beneficial.
I think the key thing is just trying to personalize things and become more, make your actions more sensitive to the needs of others. I think when it comes to charity, for example, Judaism says much better to give smaller amounts on a regular basis than one big lump sum, and then not have to think about it, out of sight, out of mind. It wants us to be thinking about this. It's all about consciousness. Become more sensitive to the issues around you. If you give charity to someone, certainly if you're seeing someone in person, you give charity to them. If you don't smile at them, you haven't done the mitzvah. You have to actually give them and greet them with a nice countenance. And I think we think about the greatest Jewish leader of all time, Moshe. It's before he's charged with the mission, what does he do? He goes out to the Jews and sees their suffering and the Egyptian slave, and then the suffering of the Midianite girls, and he sensitizes himself. He brings consciousness. A Jewish leader is someone who they don't have to be raised. They don't have to come from the poverty and struggle of the masses, but they have to be in touch with and conscious of and see for themselves the people to which they are being called upon to represent.
I think you can't be a good leader unless you have 100% clarity over who and what you're leading and what you're really fighting for.
I just being in touch. You can't just rule from a high tower. Exactly, you've got to be in touch with the issues on the ground, and even if it doesn't change your specific policies, it gives you an empathy. A sensitivity to the issues which you're working on. I think that just ties into what you were saying before about politics sometimes being a bit detached from the issues on the ground. This is one of the reasons why I'm also I personally, and this is not necessarily informed by Judaism, but more just by the political allegiances and values that my dad was certainly is a part of, which was skepticism of big government schemes in its ability. I remember there was a line from an economist he's very that he really liked, called Friedrich Hayek, who said the curious task of economics is to demonstrate to men how little they know about what they imagine they could design. And I think that is that has some truth to it. Yeah. That definitely has some truth to it.
I do think that we are speaking very idealistically about if people act more like menschers and they were more aware of the issues, maybe political discourse could be a lot more civil. Practically, do you see it happening at all?
Well, it starts with a very basic premise, which is we are both in this to try to make society better.
Right.
And we both
can we make that message louder? I don't mean you and I, but is this something that could happen in the near future? Do you see it going in that direction? Or you could argue that the trend is going completely the other way and we're really picking up speed right now.
I think there needs to be, you need to start off with mutual respect. Both sides need to work on mutual respect. The second part is, I think, also not making politics the be-all and end-all of our lives is really important as well. I think a much more emphasis on communal grassroots initiatives rather than big top-down. You're very concerned with we need more redistributive wealth, or that's your big issue. Start with your community and try and fundraise among the machas in your community and create an initiative that can look after the most vulnerable in your specific community. If everyone did that, that's a lot less political, because it's not about some big grand political schemes, but it can have similar effects. And then the third part, I think there also needs to be more talk about, given the nature of the fact that we now live in a society that does have quite divided political opinions on things, we need to make, and I say this with a great degree of hesitance because it sometimes flies in the face of what I feel. But I do believe that in some respects and on some matters we do need to make compromise more of a value, especially when it comes to politics. I'm not saying necessarily in moral spheres, but I'm saying in politics, specific policy prescriptions. I do think to have a functioning society, when you've got a wide variety of views, there does need to be a little bit of give and take. We need to be less fanatical about politics, because otherwise, well, that's how we've got to this point, with the point where we are now. People are being too fanatical about their political positions. It's their religion.
How do you do it, though? When you get into a conversation with somebody whose political views are so far from your own, and they seem to be completely unable and unwilling to listen to anything other than their own point of view, what advice would you give? How would you engage with that person? How would you try and show them that, and to bridge that gap, to show that compromise, whilst not always agreeing with what they're saying 100%, but extending the olive branch to have a conversation to try and make something a bit more productive?
Well, sometimes the act of just being a mensch can influence people. You mean
outside of it, just sort of being polite and offering?
Yeah, and even during the conversation, the conversation as well, just showing yourself to be the bigger person. And I think we saw that recently. We've seen that recently in British politics. Sometimes when people reach across the aisle and say, I might not agree with you on this, but I have respect for you. That can really impact a hardened heart. I think the second thing is, like, if someone doesn't want to listen, they don't have a conversation. Ultimately, there's only so much you can do, but talk to other people of that persuasions. I'm not saying people have to agree. I'm not, you can maintain your positions, but it's just about those three things I was saying: the ability to compromise and recognize a bit of give and take, not to make this the be all and end all of your life, and to recognize the humanity on the other side. I think those are the three key things. And look, there will be some people that just can't see that will just see the Republicans or the Democrats as the devil or whatever, But I think it's sort of like reaching a critical mass. The more that people can do these three things, the more we can. It's just about winning over the majority of people.
Okay. What are your views on sort of political, maybe like YouTube channels even, or small or political news? In this country, most news stations, I think GB News is pushing a bit more, have to observe a certain level of bipartisanship, and they have to sort of present both sides. I've heard a line about the BBC News. If they're getting equal number of complaints from both the left and the right, then they know they're doing their job correctly. Mm-hmm. But nowadays online, we have these limits don't really exist anymore. I mean, we don't really have rules so much on truth, let alone on laying outside of opinions. Therefore, people get very involved and they get their news from very polarized point of views, right and left. Do you think these are helpful or detrimental or not detrimental, but they're just part of the equation? Are you nervous about them? Because I am. I'll tell you that.
There's nothing wrong with people having with opinion media, in my view. There's nothing wrong with it at all. But the point is that there needs to is people living in echo chambers and only hearing one point of view and one opinion, and also the fact that a lot of this stuff is the way you get views is by saying things that saying things that are polarizing and divisive and personal attacks are juicy. They create clicks.
The thing with the Facebook thing is the whistleblower. How the big revelation was that Facebook knowingly promotes sort of posts and things that are inflammatory. Yeah. To get clicks, and I read that and going, was that not known?
Well,
I always assumed that everyone knew they were doing it. It shocked me that it was a shock.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a problem that there's an economic benefit for these media companies to post content that is divisive or polarizing. But at the same time, I think about the rise of sincere, thoughtful podcast content or long form content, which is very popular, because I think after a while, we're going to see it continuing. There is a growing hunger for just more calm, thought out debate and discussion, and people are getting tired of these 3-minute head-to-head clashes. Sometimes, and by the way, I'm not against doing them. You can have them, and you can have sincere, even fiery debates. But again, it just goes back to those three principles. You're debating the opinion, not the person, and you're also not making it just the hill you're going to die on, without any ability to kind of compromise. I think, compromise is a key element of life generally. When you're stuck with problems, being able to be a bit flexible and shift. My dad's really taught me the importance of doing that. When you're faced with problems, you don't have to. It doesn't have to be exactly your way, the way you always wanted it. No, shift it. Work with the other side and recognize that it's not just you in the room.
Absolutely. I think the reason I said that I'm probably nervous is I'll watch some of these videos where they'll be reporting on a news story of the day. Biden did this or Trump did that. And I could just guess, knowing the way the person who's speaking, how they lean politically, I can guess how every single instance what they would say. And that Biden will do some generic act, and therefore it will be bad or good, depending who they are.
Yeah, well, this
right?
is...
And you can watch both sides, and you get the exact same story.
Yeah.
But it's a default, you've put on the anti or the pro filter onto a story, and you just know what it's going to be. And that just seems to be, well, unhelpful more than anything else. But also, if you've been involved in a debate with someone, an argument with someone, like it happens to me every now and again, we're not in a safe space, is why arguing with people and debating and really strengthening one's ideas, is I'll debate something that I really believe in my head, and then midway through the argument, I realise that I don't believe in it at all, and I'm just arguing something that I don't believe in. And I can keep hearing, maybe the other person doesn't hear it, but I hear all the flaws of my argument. Now, the trick is, or the thing I'm meant to do here, is to be intellectually honest, to be aware, okay, I don't actually believe what I'm saying right now, and the other person's making some good points. I should change my views, or I should develop my views. This is the natural, mature evolution of what viewpoints should be. This is developing of ideas. But, yeah, if we don't have a space for that, if we just have this default filter of all bad, all good, then surely we're just having both sides of people often fighting ideas that they might not necessarily believe in, and they're leaving no room for nuance or forgiveness or just understanding, which is, look, he didn't do what I wanted him to do, but there was some merit there.
One of the reasons, another of my many reasons that we've been listing in this conversation for why I just don't want to go into politics, because I'm actually a bit bored of it. Like, it's just as you're saying, you just know what each side is going to say now. Like, I've heard it all before. Judaism and Torah is so much more infinitely deep and fascinating and I find it exciting. And yes, politics does have an excitement to it, but like, I just know what each side believes, what they're going to say. I can predict it all. Like, I can say, and it's almost like, okay, we now need to graduate from this. We know what each side thinks, but now what?
We're numbing ourselves at this point, you're saying. If you just know what they're going to say the whole time, there's nothing...
No, I think people...
You're just sitting there waiting for them to trip up and then go, aha, caught you out, because there's nothing else to do.
Yeah, it's just a war. It's a war.
Overly scripted, and it's all these talking points, and it's spin, and...
Yeah.
Therefore, there's no value to it. There's no weight.
Yeah. I don't know how it could be any different in terms of, one side's going to think one thing, the other side's going to think the other thing. I get that. But I'm saying purely from the point of intellectual stimulation, I just don't find it that interesting.
Do you think there's room for it, where a person could be a bit more honest and open and almost show vulnerability, able to hear other opinions and admit if they got things wrong in the past? Would that be a useful voice in politics? Because I think it would be. I just think no one's going to do it, because being too honest nowadays just puts you one step away from being cancelled.
I think, to be honest, the greater issue is not that people aren't intellectually honest. I think it's more that the nature of politics is, certainly if you're working for a particular organisation, or if you are members of a political party or a member of parliament, you have to toe the party line. And even if it doesn't quite fit in with what you think should be right, or if the reason why a certain policy has to be supported is because of lots of difficult or uncomfortable reasons, or it's a really bad compromise, people so often have to become salespeople for that particular policy or that thing, not because they believe it, but because... And I kind of wish there'd be a bit more openness and honesty on the one hand. Like, I sometimes see government ministers, you can see like they're a bit lower down the pecking order, having to defend a particular policy when they know the government will probably U-turn in 2 weeks' time anyway. And they do it, and you just know they don't believe it. And a part of me, on the one hand, I appreciate government unity and see why it's necessary, but on the other hand, a part of me just wishes they'd be like, look, I support the government, but why can't they just say, I support the government by and large, But I personally can't. I'm not going to defend this
so much more for it.
I think they would. But then again, wouldn't that create a lot of instability?
Yeah.
If you have lots of government ministers not, you do. It's a tricky one, because I think if you have government ministers undermining the policies of the government, what confidence is that going to give us?
Well, there's no space at the moment right now for somebody to question Isaiah healthily.
Yeah.
And yet still show their respect. I think it can be.
Just not in high politics.
Yeah. I thought in other areas how in many sort of very religious circles, there's no sort of room anymore. We spoke about this on another podcast about there's no room to have any questions on what you think are the big things in Judaism. You just don't think it's appropriate. There's people who go like, I don't believe that the Torah is from God. That's a big hard line. People go like, I believe Torah is from God, but I don't understand a few things, and they don't feel like that level of nuance. There's a space to ask those questions. So either they feel they've got to toe the party line and believe in things they don't believe in, or run away and they get polarized from that. And the ideas can affect all areas in life. And I think it helps no one.
Yeah, no, we have a lot in sadly in many religious educational systems. You have. It's legitimate to ask the what questions, but to ask the why questions can sometimes get you in trouble, because they don't have the answers and they're worried you're going to destabilize the whole system, and that's not healthy. And I always think back to when we think of what festival is all about education and passing on the message to the next generation. What is?
I think you gave it away there, but Passover.
Why did I give it away?
You said passing on.
Oh yeah, that was completely unintentional. I didn't even realize I did that. But well, I never even thought about that Passover. Yeah, it's quite an interesting one. Passing over the message.
Not more than just all those endless jokes over Pesach of, hey, could you pass over the salt? Boom, boom.
Yeah, but it's what do we get the kids to do? Ask questions. Yeah. And by the way, the 4 questions that the kids ask at the Passover table, they're not what questions. They are why questions. What does this mean to you? What are we doing? What are we doing here? Why do we need to do this?
The whole structure.
Imagine putting them in a Jewish school today. It'll be expelled.
Well, we say that with the 4 questions, it should be done by the young, or the kids. All the questions that Seder should be asked by the young kids, and if they're not around, there should be youngest one to Seder. And even if you have a Seder just by yourself, you're still meant to frame it in a question and answer form. Yeah. Because the questions, and the point of any question, the premise of any question is, I have X and I have Y. X and Y don't fit. So please give me Z, enough piece of information to make sure X and Y fit. Yeah. And if you'd never, and only then can you understand things at a greater level, if you don't frame it through the lens of questions. So
look, Abraham came to his knowledge of God and connection to God through logic. That means the basis of our whole modus operandi is logic. So no question should be beyond asking. It's always been alien to me, this idea that you can't ask a specific question. If we're after truth, then the truth doesn't have an agenda. So ask away.
But this works it's very comfortable in the idea when you really believe that in the Torah world that the truth is divine and supreme, then it always is an answer. It's just our struggle to get there. When you believe in the Shema and the Shem in terms of being for the sake of heaven, when you believe in the heaven, and everyone at the table believes in what they're fighting for, it becomes very easy to.
Yeah, but why do you believe in it? Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, right, absolutely.
It's what if we don't have it as true to ourselves, or what they're really fighting for in a political scheme, if that doesn't really line up, then we're always going to struggle with that. I don't know what the practical solution is here.
Not necessarily.
I like to think that if we, I think it was in Israel and Yeshiva, two people were having a debate about politics or fighting about different political viewpoints on a certain issue, and the guys turned to them and went, they just need Torah. That's all they need. And maybe it was too simplistic an answer, but it felt at that time. So that was just sort of a injection of meaning that is above ourselves and importance that is above ourselves, not unattainable, but more important and more powerful than ourselves, and we're all attached to that, then a lot of these almost micro issues can go away very easily.
Well, it's interesting. We were just talking a second ago about the difference between the why questions and the what questions. And if people can have a political debate where they agree on the why, then then you just have a what discussion. That's going to be a lot healthier.
Yeah.
And why are we here? Because we all agree we want to make the best society possible, and we're both legitimate people with legitimate opinions, not legitimate opinions, but legitimate voices that are trying to that are subscribing to, looking for policy positions that can help make all of our lives better. And then you've got a good groundwork to grow from.
You wouldn't say, though, maybe you would, I'm curious about this, that the way most modern political discourse is right now, can it be too, and it's so at times far removed from what Torah values should be, could it be dangerous, detrimental to be so involved in it? Is it that for someone to try and balance that and a honest Torah life? Well,
I said at the start...
I'm not trying to go sort of hard-line barriers, anything that's not your worldview, push away. But there are times where something is the values of something are so far from oneself, you question, should you really be involved in it?
I said at the start that I think people should be, if you're a big spiritual leader, let's say, there should be a lot of caution before being very involved in a particular political party
of the influence, especially.
Well, no, because you sometimes, I think just need to be very careful not to conflate all the political positions of one political ideology or party with your religious beliefs.
Okay.
The second thing I would say is that I had this issue myself where, as you say, you end up, there are a couple of American organizations I've worked with that are involved in politics, and while it might not necessarily have been political policy positions, but more just the tone in which the discourse was descending into.
What, us and them?
Yeah, just nasty, because they believe they're at war. It became untenable, and so I'm just saying. So I'm really not discouraging people from being involved in politics, but I don't think one should never think that they need to conform to the low level of discourse that exists in politics. If anything, they should go into it to try and raise it. And I think that was one of the problems I had. And also this problem, as we spoke about before, about needing to subscribe or support every single thing of that organisation, that party that they are a part of, just to be wary of that. I don't see why that should be necessary. And yeah, I'm not saying not to go into politics. I'm just saying there are these issues to be wary of. And I think the person that needs to be studied, who helped bridge a divide where there was literally a civil war between two sides, is Abraham Lincoln.
How so?
Well, he was the president at the time of the American Civil War, and it should be important to look at his language. There's also religious language that he used in order to try and unite a divided nation, and it shouldn't be taken for granted that he was using religious language, because it can be unifying language, because it makes us all children of God, all infinitely valuable. And he, while sometimes having to make very difficult decisions, and decisions that were, very difficult, you just study the language he used, because it was language of moral clarity, and it was language. It was not. It just sounds very different to the hot-tempered language of modern politics.
All right, let's conclude. Do you want to give a message of hope for the future of political discourse and Jews and politics, Ollie? Do you have anything you want to sort of inspire us? I don't like being too downbeat. I don't think we have been too downbeat, but
I think the concept of Moshiach, from what I understand, is that this big battle that's going to take place beforehand, I don't think is necessarily a literal war of bombs and explosions and militaries. I think it's an ideological battle where people are going to have to smash their idols, their gods, their false gods, and realize that God is God. And I think that whether or not we have to do anything specific, what we're going to see happening over time is people slowly realizing that whatever they've made their God is going to disappoint them, and isn't all it's cracked up to be, and has its flaws, and isn't worth revolving their entire lives around. I think that can also apply to politics as well. It's going to happen across the board, where we all have our own gods, multiple gods in many respects, the things that we think are worth, living for and directing our entire lives towards. And politics which is, I think, the idea of Moshiach unraveling is, the period of Moshiach unraveling, is that we're slowly going to realize what's really important and put things in perspective. So I think it will actually just happen naturally, because human beings are smart and sensitive and have the ability to recognize eventually, even if it takes a bit of shaking up, to realize what's really important and put the things that are not as important or not as holy into right balance and perspective. So I'm not saying anything specific needs to be done. We've spoken about the kind of problems in politics and the things that can be. I'm not sure if I have particular practical steps towards doing that, but I do think that it's just going to. It's inevitable that people will slowly realize, just as the great big political ideologies of the past were eventually smashed and fell from the 20th century, so too we're going to recognize that today it's just today. It's actually, it's not big ideological wars, and that it's not big literal wars and grand political schemes that are transforming countries. Today it's just petty squabbling, and it's just an age of ridiculousness and foolishness that we will soon graduate and mature from.
Amen. I look forward to it. Ollie, I think we're out of time, so thank you very much. Just go.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today and listening to JTV Podcasts. You can find more podcasts from JTV, including interviews with Rabbi Manis Friedman, Dennis Prager, Rabbi Dr. Akiva Tatz, and many more. Available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Just search for JTV Podcasts with Ollie Hannesfeld. Don't forget to subscribe on the JTV YouTube channel for hundreds of videos on Jewish philosophy, Israel, Jewish wisdom, and much, much more. Please consider supporting us so we can continue to grow. Just visit paypal.me/JTV channel. Thank you for listening and have a wonderful day.